Just by way of introduction, my name is Mandy Wiener. I'm a journalist. I host the Midday Report on 702. So after this, you can just switch your radio on and have a listen, because we'll be talking about it as well on the radio today. So this is what's going to happen today. We're going to start off with a bit of a keynote speech from Lisa Seftel. She's going to talk a little bit to us. Then we're going to be unpacking the findings of the BeyondCOVID Business Survey. And we know that as a country, we really are facing more than one pandemic. There's the health, the coronavirus pandemic, but there's also this dual pandemic of economic issues as well. So many businesses being affected by the lockdown, by the pandemic as well. So this survey is so fascinating from that perspective. And just to give you a taste of what's to come about that, and without completely stealing the thunder from Lings, who's going to be presenting it later, 75% of South African businesses have reported shrinking revenues during the pandemic. A quarter have had to shut down, either temporarily or permanently. And the impact is just frightening, but we'll have all those numbers for you in the presentation a bit later when we release all of those results from the survey. We're also going to be launching the BeyondCOVID Playbook today. And what this is essentially is a free ebook. It will present strategies based on the survey, on various case studies as well, for businesses to consider in responding to COVID-19. So we'll do the survey, and then we'll tell you about the playbook as well. So just by way of background and context, let me tell you about the company that is powering the survey. It's called Redflank. It's a specialist management consultancy. And Redflank has been delivering tangible and sustainable business value for a diverse range of blue chip companies and private sector clients over the past 12 years now. It's got a level 1 BBBEE rating. It's an accredited member of the South African Supplier Diversity Council. It's got offices in Joburg as well as in Durban as well. They are trusted advisors and partners to long-standing and valued clients, providing them with results-based research, strategy, business and technology change, and assurance consulting as well. And just to explain to you a little bit about what the BeyondCOVID initiative is, it's focused on assisting businesses in South Africa to embrace solidarity, survive the impact of COVID-19. It's about shaping the response to the challenges, the opportunities, and really just maximizing business survival so that businesses can learn from each other, they can share knowledge as well, and job protection and creation. So it really is a joint initiative. A little bit of housekeeping from me, if you don't mind, before we get into the real nuts and bolts of today's presentation. So please feel free at any point to post your thoughts on the chat at the bottom, but also if you have questions throughout, put them on the Q&A. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A because at the end we're going to have a panel discussion, and it's a fabulous panel that has been set up for you. But if you've got questions, if you're from the media, if you're not from the media, please post those questions in the Q&A, and I'll be keeping an eye on those. And just say what your name is and where you're from so that I can pose those questions at the end. So please keep it going in the chat as well. If there's something that you want to point out or something you'd like to mention, please put it in the chat. You won't have the ability to ask a question by putting your mic and your camera on, but you can post it in the Q&A, and I'll be watching those closely. So before we get into the BeyondCOVID Business Survey and Playbook, we're going to ask Lisa Seftel to speak to us. And Lisa, you'll definitely recognize her name. She's an accomplished and passionate strategic leader. She has 24 years of experience within different spheres of government in South Africa. She's currently the Executive Director of NEDLAC, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, which of course is the vehicle by which government, labour, business and community organizations seek to cooperate through problem solving and negotiation on economic, labour and development issues and related challenges facing the country. So she's really in the middle of all of this. So Lisa, if you can put your camera and your microphone on, we're going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mandy, and thank you to the Beyond COVID initiative for inviting me this morning. Really, I think I'm probably just going to be raising issues around, to contextualize, I think, the survey that's been done, and also in terms of what, beyond COVID, is there beyond COVID? And I'll be honest, my input today is very sobering, because I do think that we can't run away from the fact that we are facing the gravest crisis in not only our democracy, but even beyond that. And my first slide really just shares work done by a survey, NIDS CRAM, that is a little bit old now, but just shows how many people were not working and how employment has declined substantially. If you can go to the next slide. Here is a similar picture, and you can see that the disproportionate impact of COVID on the poor. So it is among the poorest 50% that 30% have either experienced job loss permanently or temporarily, while for professionals on the other side, the figures are much smaller. Maybe also, as we end Women's Month, to look also and to acknowledge that women have also suffered disproportionately. And so you can see again that women, 2/3 of women were job losses, while they only account for less than 40% of the workforce. And I think the other thing which is very stark is the amount of children and people that have gone hungry and continue to go hungry in our country. Next slide. So in NEDLAC, we also got a service provider, Bluefields and Sansara, to do some work for us. And I'm sure this slide also reinforces what you may talk about later, but that there's been a widespread impact on businesses, with the worst hit being micro enterprises. And as you can see, the figures there. If you can go to the next slide. I think also important is that there has been a significant amount of financial assistance. And you can see here that quite a lot of people were able to access government relief schemes, 28%. And as we've seen, there's also been a lot of support from banks. And from the reporting of banks recently, you can see how that has hit them. But if they don't give the support, they will also be hit because their loans will default. But even though there's been significant assistance, I think there's still work to be done really on the effective impact of this assistance. And I'm sure that one of the things that you as Beyond COVID seek to do is to be able to build resilience and be able to find ways in which the impact can be mitigated. So I just thought also to talk a little bit about the story behind the numbers in the workplace and at home and in the community. It's a sad story. It's a devastating story. Not only have people been retrenched, but other people have been put on short-term, unpaid leave. Their leave days have been reduced, and particularly for people who value time spent like in their rural areas or other homes, this is hard. And where there has been retrenchments, there's also a good possibility that when workers have been rehired, it's with more precarious employment. In the workplace, it's a new workplace. You have to adhere to a lot of health and safety requirements, often which might require very big adjustments. So it's not necessarily easy to comply with the government direction. Ventilation has become an important issue, and it's not often easy to improve ventilation or to ensure 2-meter distances. And then I think companies also really struggled about how to manage an incident in the workplace. Do you disinfect the whole workplace? Do you close the workplace down for a number of days? Although I think we're all learning very quickly and getting better at it. And then I think particularly for workers, but for everybody who use public transport, it's a big anxiety about traveling safely to and from work. And then again, in terms of worker rights, but not necessarily only workers, everybody in a workplace, is that there is the possibility of discrimination and stigma, because it's so new. And then, while there are procedures in the event of retrenchments, it's also very difficult now, and limited recourse to an inspectorate to be able to play a role. If you go to the next slide, this is really in the community, where I think there's also been significant stress. While some parents might have enjoyed being at home and spending so much time with their spouses or their children, it's also stressful that schools are closed. Some children, either spaces are small or children aren't able to get sufficient stimulation. And now when the schools open, there's also a risk to elderly people. And I think there's a genuine concern about a lost COVID generation. And then, this online has been, in some senses, amazing, but there's also and has helped our economy continue to function. But there's also there's a possibility of digital overload, and then again, a lack of digital rights for all, particularly for children or learners, including students from more disadvantaged backgrounds. On health, not only is there the challenge of hunger and malnutrition, but also a lot of people don't go to access healthcare because they're scared. Increase in gender-based violence, and I think a big issue is mental health. Not for those people, the issue of isolation, the issue of no job, and generally the depressed environment that we are all facing. And then for the future, I think there's, the work-home balance has been changed forever. I think, again, linked to mental health, the fact that funerals have been so curtailed and not able to attend them is a lack of closure, as well as other postponed rituals like weddings and christenings and so on. But I think there's also been new forms of solidarity, which I will talk about. Can you, the next slide? And these are issues that I'm sure we'll talk about more. So these are really just my ideas. To manage COVID, it's about growing resilience, care and more care and diligence. So on growing resilience, I think it's really about educating ourselves, cautious innovation, no holy cows, reviewing and reflecting, collaborating and co-creating. Care and more care, it's about preserving jobs, wearing masks, solidarity, acknowledgement of vulnerability, taking care of ourselves and taking care of our children. And then diligence around what is required in terms of non-pharmaceutical interventions. The next slide. And this is really, I think, my last slide or second last slide, is that there are sources of resilience and care. I wanted to put in here, but I'll say it, is that it requires hustling. Unfortunately, our systems are not that together in terms of government relief, private sector relief, and even NGO relief, but it is there if you want to hustle. Next slide. And so, I think we have to be cautious. We're not going to wake up one day and there's going to be a beyond COVID. But things can turn tomorrow in 2020 or may not turn. And the other thing which is most frustrating about this epidemic is it's in our hands to some extent. Yes, we can protect ourselves by washing our hands, but it's also a black swan event, which is not in our hands. So when we prepare for the future, we have to prepare with the future in mind, but we have to acknowledge that it may not be better than the present. Thank you.
Brilliant, Lisa. Thank you so much. It is a bit bleak, but as you say, we need to be resilient and we need to hustle. And we're definitely seeing that those businesses in particular that come out of this stronger are the ones that are hustling, and the individuals as well. Sure, I can speak about mental health and work-life balance and all of that for days. We'll move on though, because we do need to look beyond COVID, and hopefully there will be a beyond COVID for all of us. This too shall pass, I think, is the mantra a lot of us are adopting. So now for the Beyond COVID initiative, we're going to ask Lings Naidu and Matungo Chidi, who are both joint founders of the Beyond COVID initiative, to speak to us. Lings Naidu is a management consulting professional and business entrepreneur with 26 years of experience assisting public and private sector organizations address various business challenges and opportunities. He's a director at Redflank, a strategy and research consultancy. Matungo is a director at Mzabalazo, a boutique development consultancy focused on people, organizational, and economic development. So I'm going to hand over to Lings and Matungo now, who are going to speak to us about the Beyond COVID initiative.
Thank you, Mandy. So before lockdown and before the coronavirus pandemic, the economy was already in a recession. And so we then went into a lockdown, and companies that were resilient and were, just surviving were then gutted because of the results of not being able to operate and all of that. And so we came together to have a conversation about what can really be done to salvage the situation and to build resilience and ensure that organizations and businesses are able to survive. So we thought we needed to start thinking beyond COVID. And beyond COVID is about what needs to be done. What are the practical, tangible solutions that can be provided to businesses and society at large to ensure that we are able to survive and live beyond this. So we thought of a basket of solutions that can be provided, including market intelligence, just providing information about what is out there, what can be provided to businesses. And we also developed a Beyond COVID playbook, which is really a solution-driven, practical, tangible solution playbook that provides information about what can businesses do. We're also going to be holding monthly think tanks, and this are going to be providing information, bringing across sectors, bringing people together to engage on solutions for businesses to ensure resilience and to survive. We're also going to be developing policy position papers, and this position papers will provide information to businesses about what can be the solutions that can be provided to organizations. Government has provided some relief in terms of funding, in terms of tax breaks and all of that. And we're now exploring a number of private public partnership models that can be put into action to ensure that jobs can be saved, to ensure that businesses can be put back into action, production can go back to what it was, and to just ensure that the economy can kickstart and reset. So Beyond COVID really is about mitigating the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown, and building resilience and ensuring that as a grassroots business movement, we're able to get back into prosperity as a country. I'll hand over to Lings to continue with the overview.
Thank you so much, Matt. Mandy, just a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect, Lings, go ahead.
Okay. So if we can move on to the next slide, really. So I'm going to talk about specifically the market intelligence and the Beyond COVID playbook. The session is all about talking through the results of the survey and introducing the playbook. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm going to talk briefly about Redflank. And I think what's important to make clear at the outset is the session is not about Redflank. I'm going to say a couple of things, and the key takeaway is that to appreciate that Redflank, has done the surveys before, has done strategy before, so you can feel comfortable about the insights that we share in the session. And then I want you to forget about it. So in terms of Redflank, as Mandy mentioned, we started up about 12 years ago. The key focus for Redflank at inception was, how could we do consulting differently? It was all about how can we create value in a different way and in a more appropriate way for clients. And I think that's where, a lot of our involvement in Beyond COVID comes in. We work for public sector and private sector clients. We work for NGOs. We assist quite a lot of corporates and public sector organizations, but we also work with quite a lot of small businesses. And that's really, a big part of where we want to add value with this initiative. The key thing here really, as I said, is with regards to Redflank's involvement, the takeaway is that, we've done the surveys and the research before. You can rely on the results that we'll be presenting today. And when we talk about the playbook, this is something, we started with probably 11 years ago. So the two key things that we'll pick up on in this session from what Matt talked about is the market intelligence and the playbook. So if we move to the next slide, the question, I would like everyone in this session and the people we reach indirectly through the session to think about is how can I be involved and what difference can I make? So Matt has described what the aims of Beyond COVID are. And what that is really is to serve as a grassroots business movement focused on helping the people that require the assistance. So ideally what we want to do is we want to link up the haves and the have-nots. Admittedly, most people will say they're in the have-not situation at the moment, reduced revenue, low amounts of cash, difficult prospects ahead. But if you dig deep, you'll find that there's probably something you can do to assist the business in the building next to you. So how can you get involved? If you are a business in need and there is a way in which you could be assisted, it might just be understanding the impact on your sector better, understanding if you are unable to source supplies in your usual route, how you might be able to accomplish that differently. It might be that you are an initiative like A2Pay that is providing infrastructure for spaza shops so that they can sell airtime. It might be that you are the kind of person that has developed, some unique experiences that you can share with other businesses that will help them think their way and plan their way out of their difficult situation. So if you're a beneficiary, a potential beneficiary of the kind of assistance we can offer, the stuff Matt's talked about, please get in touch with us. BeyondCOVID.coza, this is where we are encouraging people to log on. And there is an option there for how can I get involved. Now, in terms of how you could get involved, you can contribute in a number of different ways. If you've got a good brain, if you've got good experience, if you are the kind of people that have built up the profile of experience as we have with our panelists today, then we'd encourage you to join our think tanks. We'll be holding these periodically. This kicks off the series. They will typically be industry specific. So if you are, for instance, in catering and you're wondering, how is it that you can keep your business alive and succeed over the next couple of years, you might pick up some nuggets of wisdom in these sessions. And you never know, that might be the little bit that makes the difference between whether you have to shut down or whether you're able to keep going. If you are, if you have a strong brand and if you have money, so if you have, for instance, Corporate South Africa sets aside annually 32 billion for what they call enterprise development. And what better way to employ those funds in developing enterprises than helping businesses that are struggling. And you'll see from the presentation that comes up soon that there are many businesses in that situation. So corporate South Africa, if you look at the top 40 on the JSE, your 100,000 contributed to this initiative would be less than 0.5% of your stationary budget. So I'll just pause a moment to let that sink in. For corporate South Africa, the top 40 companies listed on the JSE Securities Exchange, if you contributed 100,000 to this initiative, it would be less than 1%. Our calculations put it much lower than your stationary budget. In terms of industry partners, these are industry associations that have large membership bases. We have, you'll see from the talk through on the survey that we have based the survey results on a huge number of respondents. That number is now sitting over 2,000. When we pegged the data for the survey, it was lower. Etienne will confirm that number. But as an industry association, what we can help you with is better understand the impact on your industry and how suppliers, how customers are reacting. We already have a perspective on that. With your assistance, by you distributing our survey to your members, we will be able to produce an even more detailed view, which will be available to you free of charge. And then lastly, if you don't fit in one of those three categories, and on this point I will wrap up, you can volunteer. And what you can volunteer is your time. You know, whether it's to help administer, whether it's to help with copywriting, whether it's to help with making your expertise available to advise businesses, we welcome any assistance you're able to provide. Thank you, Mandy.
Brilliant, thanks. Thank you so much for that background on Beyond COVID. We're going to get into the really interesting part here before the panel as well. And that's the actual results of the business survey, which are just fascinating. So Lings is going to help unpack that, also the playbook. And we're going to ask Etienne van Wyk to join us. Thanks, Etienne, for coming on. Etienne's also a joint founder of BeyondCOVID. He's a strategy consultant, business transformation specialist with 20 years of experience. And Etienne currently focuses on finding and adopting solutions to integrate a globalized, digitally driven world economy with underdeveloped, underserviced, and spatially remote South African communities through public-private partnerships. So let's get into that business survey and also the playbook.
Thank you very much, Mandy. If we can go on to the next slide. In terms of the methodology that we adopted, and as Lisa said at the beginning, a lot of surveys had been done. We collected data between the 7th of June and the 22nd of August in terms of what we are sharing here today. This data is a combination of quantitative research as well as qualitative research discussions that we had. At the time that we packaged this particular information, it was 1,800 respondents. The responses hasn't stopped. Yesterday, I believe we surpassed 2,000, and we're not closing the survey. Obviously, we want to build the database. We also had interviews with key industry leaders. As you can imagine, those were some of those were anonymous because it's sensitive questions that we asked, but we got a very clear view from them in terms of what they see for their industries. And then we covered all of the sectors in the Standard Industrial Code classification. If we then move on, and this harks back to what Matt and Ling said about a grassroots business movement, half of our respondents were small and micro business, and that would be approximately 1,000 to date, whereas we also got responses from large, medium, non-profit and public sector. So in terms of the community that we are establishing here and the movement that we are launching here, I think we can truly say that we cover the entire spectrum from large through to SMME, and we can talk for all size organizations. Moving on. In terms of the current status, we're going to be just sharing 3 dimensions with you today. The first is the impact on the operating capacity. To what extent could you keep going? The second is the impact on revenue. And then the third is the sad part of the story, which is retrenchments. If we move on to capacity, you will see here that 56% of the respondents are operating under reduced capacity for the duration, or at least at some point during, our survey. 20% of businesses were privileged enough to go about the business as usual. There was 2% of the respondents actually had to raise their capacity, while, and this is a sad statistic, 23% of the business, or almost a quarter of the businesses, as Mandy said at the onset, had to close their doors. When we did the survey, there was hope that 19% of these would open their doors again. Hopefully that does come to pass. If we then look on the next slide at the businesses that were able to operate as usual, we can see a trend that comes through in a lot of dimensions, that the small and the micro businesses were least able to actually operate as per usual. Large businesses were best positioned to do that, but still only 1/3 of them could really operate under a BAU mode. What is very significant also here is that the public sector, only 24% of the public sector was able to operate as per normal, which means 75%, there was a reduction in service delivery to all of the different industries. If we move on to the next dimension that we dealt with here, at least not the next dimension, just a breakdown in terms of the different industries, how they fared in terms of capacity. As you can imagine, health and social work had to operate under increased capacity. The more privileged sectors were financial services, professional services, and real estate. They could operate business as usual to a larger degree than the other industries, while under the temporarily closed, you had entertainment and recreation featuring them very strongly, and most sad of all, the permanent closures, personal services, accommodation, agriculture, and retail. We need to qualify, though, when we talk about agriculture. Agriculture was, two sides of the story this year. The commercial farmers actually had a stellar year, but the small-scale farmers lost a lot of their route to market capabilities, and that is what you would see reflected here in terms of having to close their businesses. If we then move on and we look at the revenue impact by organization type, we try to portray a view here in terms of the percentage of organizations that had a revenue drop of more than 20%. Not surprisingly, small and micro businesses were the worst impacted. Large businesses were the least impacted, but with the qualification that it was still 64% of them, took a bath of more than 20%. Then public service, we had, comparatively speaking, were the least impacted in that 49% of them, lost more than 20%, but that in the context of the current fiscal situation is also a severe impact, as that is money that would need to be made up by other means, which are hard to come by at the moment. Moving on, if we look at the revenue impact by sector, not surprisingly, once again, accommodation, food, construction, entertainment, recreation, hairdressers were very severely hit, as well as retail. Retail, as with agriculture, is very much dependent whether you're a small or a large business. Small retail outlets were devastated. In terms of the bottom three impacted sectors, health and social work, which is not a surprise, and then financial services were able to hold on to their revenues to the strongest degree. Public sector were able to hold on to their revenues, comparatively speaking, the best. The difference being is whatever they could not collect and I believe Thomas will speak to that a little later, has put them under severe pressure to actually deliver the services they need to get the economy starting again. If we move on then to the topic that's top of mind for everybody out there, which is retrenchments, you can see once again that half of small and micro businesses had to retrench staff, 31% of large businesses, and then even public sector with the relative security of rate and taxes income, 27% of the respondents, they also had to retrench staff. If we look at the industries that were the worst and the least worst impacted, once again, accommodation, services such as hairdressers, entertainment, construction were all very severely impacted, and then very sadly, education. I think, as Lisa mentioned in the beginning, the trends for education is not very positive right now. It is one area where funds were reduced when the interim budget was adjusted to respond to COVID. And, the concept of a lost generation is very real. In terms of the sectors that had the least amount of retrenchments, financial services came out best, whereas, the public sector also had more modest retrenchments. Okay. If we go on to the next slide, we will now take a more forward-looking view, and I'm going to hand back to Linus.
Thank you so much, Etienne. So if we look at where we are at the moment, I know that, the picture is bleak in some respects. If you look at the view from the respondents to the survey, the average, the view of the average respondent is that we need about 4.3 years to recover to the levels that we were at before COVID. I guess that period can be debated, but what it does indicate is sentiment is not positive at the moment. And the interesting thing is, over the more than 2 months that we conducted the survey, that 4 years, moved from a low of about the 4.3 years moved from about 4 years up to about 4.6 years. So it hasn't varied that much. What it does indicate is that if the respondents, view is even roughly accurate, we have quite a few years to go ahead in terms of what that means. The next slide picks up on the planned retrenchments. Now, Etienne talked about the retrenchments that have been undertaken to date. This is a view of the retrenchments that are planned over the next 6 months. Now, this again is a fairly sobering view as well. If you put this in context, on average, businesses expect to retrench another 11%, another 11% of their workforce. Now, if we look at what that number means, employment in South Africa at the moment is about 16%, is about 16 million. 10% of that, if we use a rough figure, is 1.6 million. That means around 1.5 million people, or more than that, are potentially, according to current business plans, going to lose their job in the next 6 months. Now, if we look at which of the sectors are, most negatively impacted, as you would expect, accommodation and food, the travel and tourism industry linked to that expects to retrench another 1 in 5 workers over the next 6 months. Construction, roughly 1 in 6 workers, and the same for manufacturing. Now, as we know, manufacturing is the powerhouse of most economies. As important as primary sectors are, it's critical for the growth of the economy in South Africa that we have a robust manufacturing sector. And if we look beyond in terms of 4R, the fourth industrial revolution, ICT is another critical area. The areas that are least impacted, financial services, again, seems to be riding the storm fairly well. Health and social work is good, certainly, as we need the capacity to ensure that we're able to deal with COVID and its direct impacts. Mining appears to have, undertaken the retrenchments they needed to, and education also seems to be one of the better positioned sectors. On the next slide, we then look at another indicator of the outlook going forward, which is the amount of funding that's required. And when I was preparing this morning, I went back and double checked these figures because they are quite sobering. So on average, if you look at the percentage of organizations that are expecting to need at least 6 months funding over the next 12 months, a quarter of them believe they're in that position. Now, if we put that in context, what that means is about 1 in 4 businesses believe that to survive the next 12 months, they will need they'll need funding to cover their costs for half of that period. Now, as you would expect, large businesses are the least impacted in this sense, while interestingly, small business, small to micro, is not the most impacted. Public sector is. Now, all of these, indicators are concerning, and as Lisa mentioned, we are living in a sobering environment, and shortly we'll talk about, what we can do about that. So if we move on to the next slide, I believe this should look at the impact by sector. Again, accommodation and food high up on the list. In terms of other services, hairdressers, beauty salons, and so on, you can see they are in a fairly dire situation as well. About 1 in 3 saying they need funding for half of the 12 months coming up. And then entertainment and recreation, as you would expect. Public services and financial services bringing up the bottom, so the least impacted, or the sectors that are expected to be least impacted going forward. On to the next slide. The question is, no one needs to, you don't need the survey to tell you that we are in difficult circumstances at the moment. The nature of humanity and the nature of human psychology is that no matter how difficult the circumstances are that we are faced with, we somehow manage to survive. So I guess we all know deep down inside that we will make it through this. The question is, what do we need to do to make that possible? And is there really hope at the end of the tunnel? Now, if we look at some small indicators, companies appear to have adjusted fairly quickly to a new set of circumstances. As an example, our survey indicates that 52% of businesses, so it's more than half of businesses, have at least 20% of their staff working from home at the moment. Even more encouraging is that 45% of businesses, so not much less than the 52, believe that at least 20% of their staff can work from home permanently going forward. Now, if you are interested in balance of life, and if you see technology as an enabler for the new workplace, then you will see that in the midst of these difficult times, there is a silver lining, and there are things we can look up to. Now, to put this in context, I know it's unfortunate that we use an American example, but out of the Fortune 500, 57 businesses were born out of a crisis. And you're thinking, okay, 57 out of 500, that's just over what, 10%? But even more interestingly, more than half of the Fortune 500 companies started up in a time of recession or in a time when we were in a bear market. So when the economy was essentially in a difficult position. So if there is a silver lining, how do we reach out and grab onto it and take advantage of it? And that's really where our second initiative comes in, and that's what I'll talk about on the next slide. So I put playbook is equal to free here because what we're proposing, it's very important to understand, is our attempt to make a difference. And if we look at how we plan on doing that and why we're even looking at this, the research indicates that around 1 in 3 businesses are replanning at the moment. So they're undergoing strategic replanning. The exact percentage, if you're interested, is 36%. Interestingly, it's not just lip service to we're in a difficult situation and now we need to change things. When we asked what are the critical skills going forward, you had your usual suspects. So 56% of respondents said financial planning. Difficult times, you know, businesses are going to obviously focus on the numbers. But interestingly, almost half, so 44% of businesses indicated that a critical skill for them at the moment is planning. So the playbook is really our attempt at helping you with that exercise. If whether you are a small business or the head of a division within a large corporate, you will now be in a situation where you will be thinking, what do I do next? How do I ensure, number one, that I survive, and number two, that I actually position for success going forward? Now, I'm not a basketball fan, but I do like documentaries, and I watched a really fascinating documentary about basketball called The Last Dance. It's actually a tribute to Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Post the documentary, I must say I'm a diehard Michael Jordan fan. Orufile, if you're watching, LeBron James still has a bit of a way to go before he can match the great Michael. Reason I mention him is I was fascinated by how the games were always decided in the last 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, making the right move was absolutely critical. So we have more than 30 seconds to do our planning, but making the right move now as a business is going to be critically important. If you look at the basketball players, they have something called a playbook. And in the playbook, they say, in this situation, do that. And having that playbook allows them to make the right decisions in difficult circumstances. Now, we're not saying that the playbook that we are putting together, that we've pulled together, and that will be released, by the way, on the 1st of September, next week, Tuesday, we're not saying that it's the be-all and end-all. We're not saying it'll give you the right answers. But in the survey responses, it was so heartening to see some respondents saying, thank you for the survey. Considering these questions has helped me think through how I respond. Not in those words, I'm paraphrasing. So what this playbook is not, it's not a manual for how you get out of the situation you're in, or if you're in a good situation, how you lift the bar. It's some ideas about how you respond depending on what situation you're in. And that's backed by case studies and so on. So I won't spend too much time on this. You will have the opportunity to read the playbook in detail next week when it is released. What we are saying though is the playbook is a guide. It's a primer for thinking. It's not the playbook Michael Jordan had in '91 when they started on their winning streak. It's neither is it, the version that they had in '98 when they had racked up 6 season wins. And just a little aside, Orufile, I think take note of that. I'm not sure how many LeBron is at the moment, but 6, I think, is not really, within his reach at the moment. We're somewhere, in that 91 to 98 spectrum, maybe let's say 93, 94. So this will help you. Now, to cut to the chase, we know that there are many people doing many things. Beyond COVID is one amongst many initiatives that is meant to help. We know, for instance, that as much as government has provided 200 billion worth of guarantees for businesses to access funding through banks, as of July, only 11.7 billion of that was actually dispensed. So that's around 5%. Now, in terms of the playbook, and I'll move pretty quickly from here on, what we've come up with is a 5-step process, and it's actually really, really simple. Step 1 is, if you want to come up with a plan, you need to know 2 things. Step numbers 1 and 2. You need to understand how your business has been impacted and how it might be impacted in the near future. So how is your supply being impacted and how is your demand being impacted? And then the second one is no surprise, right? What will your cash flow look like going forward? Because if you have money, there are more things you can do. There are more options open to you than if you don't. The third step is the really important one. It's to understand what scenario you are in. And I'll walk through what that actually means shortly. Once you have your scenario, the playbook will then help you. with good ideas, what other people in that scenario, what other businesses in that scenario have actually done to get into a better position. And based on that, you will then have the play. So Michael Jordan, 10 seconds from close of game, you know, does he go for the 3-pointer? Does he pass it to Scottie Pippen for a 1-pointer closer to the net? So on to the next slide, and I've just got 2 slides to go to describe very quickly how we handle scenarios and how the playbook might help you. So key on the scenarios is that what it maps is for cash-strapped businesses. There's 2 versions of the scenarios. There's one for cash-strapped businesses, and there's another one for businesses that are cash flush. Now, we know most businesses fit in the cash-strapped scenario. Remember we said that a high portion of businesses in the 20-30% across sectors believe they need more than 6 months of funding to stay open over the next 12 months. So most businesses will find themselves in this scenario. Just to describe very quickly, the axes, the vertical one is demand and the horizontal one is supply. Although it says plus on both the axes, that indicates in both instances an increase in supply or an increase in demand, but it also covers a scenario where your supply and demand is the same as it was beyond COVID. Now, there are some obvious plays here. For instance, on the supply side, it makes sense to explore and implement socially distanced working as far as possible. We saw earlier that close to, that more than 50% of businesses are in that situation at the moment. On the demand side, you know, an obvious play is socially distanced client offerings. So those are the obvious ones, and they are covered in the playbook. And in the playbook, you'll see some case studies of companies and what they have done to actually make this happen. I want to use a couple of practical examples to explain the scenario. So if you look at the scenario that most businesses, 75% of businesses that are cash strapped find themselves in the down, maybe out scenario. Now, you'll notice that my hair is a bit long. It's a consequence of me not having a haircut for about 6 months. And I, you know, I'm embarrassed to admit that that would have contributed together with other clients to our family hairdresser, Jenna's, taking the decision to shut down a business. And it's quite simple. When your demand drops below a level that you can sustain your fixed costs, you need to consider the out scenario. It's not just small businesses that are doing this. We've all heard about EdCon. We know that other businesses are benefiting from that. For instance, the Foschini Group is now buying over Jet. And I've just got 1 slide to go, and I'll wrap this up. Another, you know, personal example is, and I don't want to use my personal trainer's name because I want to share some details about his business with you that you might consider confidential. So let's consider him the guy that doesn't understand what I need a 2-minute break means. So what the 2-minute break guy, the situation he found himself after COVID is that obviously people weren't coming to the gym. He still had to pay for rent, but he still had other expenses as well he needed to cover. And he also found himself in this scenario, but he moved into the maybe space. And he leveraged a play that, if you look it up, is called cost ovation. And it's actually fascinating and something you really need to consider. So what does cost ovation mean? It means doing less, doing more with less at a lower cost. So what Nick did was he moved to virtual sessions. You are probably wondering, obviously that would have dropped his costs, but how did it improve his customer experience? And the way in which it has done it is, for instance, I did 1 training session a week. That has now moved up to 3 times a week, and I can do that because I don't have to travel to gym. So I'm going to use just 2 more examples, one on this slide and one on the next one, to wrap this up. 8% of businesses are in what we call the partner out situation. The important thing to note here is that you might not be cash strapped, but you might choose a cash strapped scenario because you have the ability to do it. So in the partner out example, I know that when COVID-19 first struck and we were in lockdown, it was impossible to get deliveries without waiting 5 days. Bottles partnered with Pick and Pay and allowed Pick and Pay to get greater reach in terms of deliveries. Not unique. Marks and Spencer has done the same thing in the UK with Deliveroo. So these are the kinds of case studies that will be picked up in the playbook. The next slide I'm going to touch on briefly. There's a brilliant example in terms of cash flush scenarios. There's a company called Simon. It's an owner of multiple malls in the US. Obviously, malls are emptying out, people are not paying their rent because the retailers are struggling. What they've done is two things that you might want to consider. The one is they bought out some of their customers because they had the cash and that protected their revenue. And the other is they repurposed the space so people like Amazon could use them as distribution centers. One more example, and this is a local one. There's an online swimwear distributor in the Cape Town called Gabriela. Obviously, in COVID, no one's really going to the beach. They're probably not going to be buying swimwear, but they had a smaller line of business distributing kombucha via digital channels, e-commerce. They grew that into a channel to distribute produce from smallholder farmers, and that seems to be doing very well. So wrap this up on the next slide. The playbook will help you understand your current situation, how you plan your cash flow, and how you map your impact on demand and supply. Based on that, what scenario are you in? And then it's going to give you some case studies and ideas about things you can do to make your situation better. The playbook will be coming out next week, Tuesday on the 1st, and you will be able to access it from our website, beyondcovid.coza, and finally, it is free. Thank you, Mandy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lings. We always need free things in life. And clearly you've been watching The Last Dance, you know, just to continue that analogy. LeBron's only won 3 King James compared to Michael Jordan 6. But, you know, every Michael Jordan Scottie Pippen in his life. So.
Fair enough.
So some fascinating numbers there. For me, the highlights really from that survey, 76% of SA businesses report revenue losses. It's really quite bleak. 56% of participants in that survey operating under capacity. We know that it's really tough out there, but a silver lining, 83% of those businesses that are currently shut are expecting to open up. So we always like to look at the silver lining and the potential that is coming and some hope for the future. The importance of hope right now, absolutely crucial. So I want to remind you, there's some great questions in the Q&A already for the panelists, which I'm going to ask, but please, if you have any questions from the survey, please post them in the Q&A. So I'm going to introduce the panel now, and it really is a formidable panel, and I'm going to ask you all to put your cameras on, those of you who are on the panel as I introduce you. Alon Reyes he likes to call himself the Chief Excitement Officer, which is just the coolest title ever. Alon is the founder and CEO of Raise Corp, a business incubator which currently supports over 500 businesses, written a few books as well. If you can just put yourself on mute for now, Alon, because there's some feedback there. Then Advocate Faye Mukadam, she's a chartered director and advocate of the High Courts as well. A super long bio, but she's currently the head of Conscious Capital, which is a majority Black female-owned corporate finance boutique firm specializing in social and impact investments across the continent. Valdine Reddy is currently the Director of Capital Markets at the Joburg Stock Exchange. Her past experience includes equity sales and trading at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch, after which she assumed her role as Head of Equity Derivative Sales at Renaissance Capital. Thanks, Valdine. And then Thomas Mkaza has vast experience and expertise in local government issues. He's currently playing an integral role in the administrative team of 5 that have been deployed by provincial government to rescue the Mangaung municipality. So he has lots of expertise in local government if you have any questions for him. So I'm going to start off by asking a couple of these questions that have come up in the chat, because there's some really good ones here. And I want to start off with this question from Tsepo Khapane, who says, "Good morning, Mandy. My name is Tsepo from Joburg. I'm a young social entrepreneur with an events management company that has been immensely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. My belief is that the youth has potential to steer new industries of innovation and technology. How can young people be encouraged and supported to create new businesses beyond COVID-19? And Alon, I'm going to start with you here, because I think this is just down your alley on entrepreneurship. We're hearing a lot about pivoting, obviously the events industry hard hit. What is your advice for him?
Thanks, Mandy. Let's just firstly deal with the concept of pivoting, which is one of my hate words right now, because it's being used inappropriately and incorrectly, and it's actually causing a lot of damage in the marketplace that I'm experiencing right now. So to pivot really is to move off an existing core competence and use that core competence in a different way. So we use one of either core competence, your clients, your components, your channels to market, or what we call your critical competencies, which is like your sales and marketing. But essentially, it's about using what you have in a new way to the new who, the new what, the new how, etc. What pivoting has been, for me as a misnomer, is it's been used as a start again, as a brand new startup. So that is very different to pivoting, because in a brand new startup, you go through a learning curve, a brand new learning curve, which is always expensive. And in bad times where there's low levels of cash, you don't want to be going through a new learning curve. So if you are not using an existing client, and selling a new product or new service in a new way, or using your core competencies and combining them in a new way, then for me, I think it's the wrong thing to do. I've seen right now, just to finally give you an example of what I've seen now, is a lot of businesses think they're pivoting, but they're actually opportunistic, and that's very different to pivoting. And the problem with opportunism, when you don't use core competence or your clients, is that you're left with the sediment of that. So I've just seen a business that's pivoted, in inverted commas. They thought they pivoted into masks. They got 300,000 mask order from one of the government departments. They went and set up a CMT, a cut, make and trim operation. They finished the order, and then they were left with all this infrastructure that they now had to pay for. And so it's actually causing them more damage now than had they gone into it. So I just want to bring some sobriety to the word pivot.
Brilliant, thank you, Alon. And obviously lots of questions around entrepreneurship. If you have any of those, we'll pose them to Alon. Faye, I think this is a question for you about the opportunity of the moment and how people can make the most of it. Ash from ProTem Recruitment, in brackets retrenched, Herbal Life has increased sales during this pandemic. I believe any business will have to adjust itself in such a way that the need for the service is still very great. For example, if every company ends up doing retrenchments, recruitment companies will close for lack of service needs. How does a company that has only been in a certain industry adjust or change to still obtain business?
Thank you, Mandy. I think that the points that Ling's talked to towards the end of his slides are really important. And the one thing to leverage the available opportunities, and there are many, despite all the doom and gloom, and I don't want to negate the seriousness of the situation we are facing, but the opportunities abound. If we look at the needs and the problems that are available and position businesses, building on from what Alon said, as to how we can respond to those needs or solve for them within the space that you're operating in, I think it talks to not necessarily changing your business, but basing it on the current context. And one of my pet peeves is the fact that everybody looks at this pandemic as, oh my gosh, we didn't know, we couldn't have known. And I challenge that thinking, because in business, you need to think constantly, whether you're on the JSE or a small business owner, about risk agility and about how you can be sure to be elastic and dynamic irrespective of what is thrown at you, because there will be another type of COVID situation coming up. So business owners can use this opportunity to say, well, what is available out there? What can I access? As opposed to simply being opportunistic or pivoting in the way that Alon was talking about, is leapfrogging the business, looking at disruptive technology to assist you in doing what it is that you would like to do. If we look at Uber and Airbnb, for example, they didn't reinvent anything. It's a technology platform, but what it did is it highlighted client service and gave people what they needed just on demand. So I think that's where business owners and looking at what Ash is talking about, that's where you'd need to focus on.
Brilliant, Faith. Thank you so much. Valdine, I think this is a good one for you from Ingrid Goodspeed. Given the stock exchange historically leads the real economy by 6 months or so, surely a recovery is expected before 4.5 years. And I saw another question elsewhere also questioning that 4.5 years. So maybe you can answer that.
Thank you, Mandy, and thanks, Ingrid, for the question. I guess many people have put a shape to what this recovery looks like: U-shape, V-shape, W-shape, and the pace at which, like you said, the stock market recovers sometimes could be a lead indicator. But what we've noticed is that you can look high level on just returns and recoveries. In fact, I just saw a stat this morning that emerging markets, the MSI EMEA index is flat year to date, after being down almost 40% in the wake of the COVID pandemic. But it was largely led from China. So what happens is within the industry, you have different sectors that would recover sooner than others. And I think it was also highlighted through some of the stats that Etienne shared of some of the industries that would struggle a lot more. The market recovery may not necessarily indicate a broad-based recovery on the macro down to every industry level. However, it is sentiment in terms of driving some of the change in the catalyst. I think what is important is not to assume that any recovery would have a read-through in every industry. As Link mentioned, and one thing that has come out from us from a JSE perspective is really this more collaboration and working together to help that even balance across the industry, so that those that are sectors and industries and companies listed on the exchange and even outside of the exchange in the ecosystem, that we can provide more tangible and practical ways of accessibility, of livelihood, of viability, so that the recovery is a bit more broad-based for all and hopefully sooner than the envisaged timeline. But it's going to be very hard to use one indicator as a benchmark for all. So what I would suggest in this regard is really look at the industries that we're talking about that are most vulnerable, and as a collective, let's figure out what's the best way together that we can move the dial and make sure that everyone gets pulled along the recovery if possible. Thanks, Mandy.
Brilliant, Valdine. Thank you so much. Thomas, I'd like to just move to the local government side and what local government is doing for SMMEs. We've seen quite a few questions about where does funding come from, where does the money come from? There's a question here from Anastasia, a few questions saying, we could not do any fundraising as we had restrictions. Now our normal donors cannot support the NPO. How do we recover where clients can't donate and we can't give what is the best strategy forward? So from a local government perspective, Thomas, what is government doing to support these small businesses that are really struggling?
Thanks, Mandy. There's quite a number of things that we're doing. We are also suffering just like all other businesses. Our revenue has declined in the municipality where I'm at. It has declined with more than 25%. So it is a huge problem. So what we have begun to do is to try and look at the way we are rendering services. For instance, some of the services that we render, we used to have a huge number of staff, for example, in one building, and that has its own costs. So we have reduced the number of people who are actually in offices. In terms of services where we've got to be collecting refuse, for an example, we have changed the number of days that we do this. And in that way, it reduces the cost on us. So we are looking at new ways of delivering services. For sure, we cannot be looking at national government forever and ever. But having said that, because we're receiving quite a number of conditional grants, what we have done is the way we do our projects also, we have tried to assist micro enterprises. That is, we're involving more and more of smaller businesses than big business in our various projects. For instance, in the current financial year, the capital projects that this one municipality will be embarking upon, it's to the tune of 612 million rands. Now, when you look at work opportunities that will be derived from that, it translates to something like 6,000 work opportunities just for this current financial year. Now, what we're looking at is to what extent do we ensure that those work opportunities that shall be derived out of these capital projects will actually be sustainable beyond this one financial year. So there's quite a lot of things that we're trying to do to repurpose what we normally do as local government.
Brilliant, thank you, Thomas. I'm actually going to throw this question to Lisa as well, from a NEDLAC perspective. Lisa, what is being done in terms of offering funding to these businesses that are really struggling at this point?
Yes, thanks for that. You know, I was absolutely struck by one of the figures in the Beyond COVID presentation, that up to 20% of organizations require 6 months of funding. And I think the critical thing is they require funding, not loans. And there is this big loan guarantee scheme of government, which has been talked about significantly, you know, with the NEDLAC social partners in Parliament and so on. And it seems to me that, and there isn't uptake because people don't want loans, they actually need grants. And you know, I think if there was this ability for there to be grant funding and not loan funding, it would make a significant difference on the sustainability of companies, particularly small companies. So I don't have an answer here, but I do think that, you know, those of you who are in organized business should be arguing for this, because I think there's a good economic case in terms of recovery for such an initiative. You know, there's often talk that there is quite a lot of liquidity in our system and that there's pension funds and so on. And, you know, I think there must be some innovation here, rather than trying to flog this issue of the loan scheme when people are very reluctant to take on additional debt. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. So there's 2 questions here around the use of technology. I'm not sure, Alon, Faye, maybe you can answer these. The first one is from Sia Kuzukisa from Cape Town. For one to move their business online with limited resources, how can one maximize free platforms or softwares, and how reliable are they? And then from Chanel Ratif, most companies during this time have decided to adapt their business models to cloud-based computing services. When thinking about beyond COVID, would you encourage more companies to use the cloud to do their businesses? More so, what benefits and challenges are there when businesses take to the cloud? So if any of the panelists, if you feel compelled to answer this question, go for it.
So I'll weigh in first, Mandy. I think that beyond COVID, and you know, it's BC19, and if we look at what the survey results are, something that's important is that each of us as individuals and teams and companies, you know, big or small, should look at what can we do to contribute and to make things better. So increasingly in the technology space, you're getting more technology, digital platforms available that are akin to the open source world. So there's a lot of free stuff available, a lot of different resources that you can access. And something that I found, which Alon can probably talk to better, is that businesses don't always know, business owners, individuals don't always know where to go to access what is available. And that's why I always maintain we need to stop planning and stop talking and just start implementing. So for me, what would be really nice to see after all of this is where we almost look at a we exchange kind of situation where we make ourselves like this initiative that Lings and them are spearheading, where we make ourselves available. Different people help to say, if you have a question like this, where do you go to access your resources? I know there's an app called, or a website called Entry Hub, which helps people look at where you can go and access resources. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just in looking at how businesses reposition themselves, looking at new revenue streams, looking at reviewing capital allocation. Brawl did an online auction yesterday, for example, on Business Day TV. So all of a sudden, it's not only the people in the room that can have access to that auction, it is people all over the world. Then for Africa Exchange, which is one of the new stock exchanges, here you're seeing, again, a far more not minimizing or reducing any of the licensing or compliance requirements, but where it is a lot more flexible in terms of user friendliness, understanding how to access funding, or to access different individuals to access different opportunities. So it's all out there. I think it just needs some thinking, and business owners need to not be afraid to put up their hands and say, I need help, and see what comes of it. And I think that Lings's platform will leverage that. Thanks, Mandy.
Excellent. Thanks, Faye. Alon, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe I've got maybe to add, starting off with perhaps a harsh response to that, is that for me, Google, if you really want to find something, we've all have got an incredible resource in the world today, which is Google, and you just type in and you spend an hour trying to research for yourself what is available, what's free, look at reviews, etc. And it's really is that simple, and you just have to spend the time. I think the second point is I think that what's important is that we do move to digital, a digital world and digital business, and with one caution or one caveat, that it's not simply that we move everything onto online. I've seen a lot of businesses now and go and set up online stores and online businesses, but there's no demand there because it's not the equivalent. You have to understand how to do it online. So there's a bit of knowledge required in terms of to modify, let's call it a physical business into a digital business. It needs an understanding. And in that instance, I would look to also a lot of specialists out there who have got that knowledge and can help you. And there's a lot of free resource on YouTube. There's a lot of free source on Google around that as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Alon. Valdina, a question for you. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about entrepreneurs. There's a question about the informal market as well. I'm interested in finding out about the biggest businesses. Often we think those with the strongest foundations are the ones that will withstand the storm, but they're also being knocked over. We've seen that happening now. What is the picture amongst listed companies, and what is your advice to them about how to survive this?
It's very interesting you bring that up, Mandy. And, initially we were all solving for what's going to happen to the small, the mid-caps, the entrepreneurs, the micro companies. But COVID, unfortunately, has been indiscriminate and has been far-reaching across the big and the small. We have also been working with the industry and with other financial market players to understand how do we support big and small companies. What are the right movers to do that? Because you are very right. The medium term or the long term catalyst for growth in South Africa may largely come from the small to medium enterprises, more job creation, more entrepreneurs. But there's also a heavy weight and a concentration around some of our larger companies that sustain a lot of jobs. Unfortunately, we've seen big and small across many industries already facing retrenchments, changes in styles of the way they work, reduced hours, and we would have seen that in some of the unemployment and UIF stats as well. So I think you are very spot on and right that we need to consider along big and small companies what's the right viability and metrics. And this is something we definitely bearing cognizance to. Like I say, it's industry specific, but there is a deliberate attempt to say, what are the right raise mechanisms? What are the right, listing mechanisms? What are the right accessibility mediums for small companies and companies? What are the short-term reliefs, longer-term reliefs to make sure that there's support across large and small companies? Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Valdine. Thomas, you knew this question was going to come your way, and it has come up on the Q&A. What about corruption? What can we do to address it? How do we factor it into our scenarios?
Wow. Well, that's a that's a big question. I don't
country's problem right now.
I really don't know how to respond to it, but as you will know, if you read what the AG has been talking about, local government corruption, it's very, very scary. I think in this particular instance, what we're now looking at, it's that those who are actually caught in this whole issue of corruption, action must be taken against them. What we are looking at, for example, with the amendment of the Public Audit Act, anyone who is found having his little fingers in the cookie jar will have to face the music. We are tightening internal controls within the municipality in the way our operations are actually done, which means that we're making it a bit difficult for people to be able to access municipal funds. By putting up a whole lot of different standard operation procedures for expenditures and so on. And of course, we are tightening consequence management also. We are hopeful that this will change this whole perception about what is happening in that space. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas, and sorry to throw you that hospital pass, but you did well. So we're going to start just wrapping up, and I'd like to finish off by just asking each of the panelists, 30 seconds, literally, what is your takeaway from the Beyond COVID survey? What is your advice to people? What's the take-home message? Alon, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll hand over to the next person.
Thanks, Mandy. For me, I always like to look at the positive, and for me, what I take away, I think, was that 83% will restart again. I actually have seen a huge amount of opportunity with the businesses that we're involved in, and my main message to them is focus on the opportunity. There is so much bad news. You don't have to go anywhere to see that, but focus on the good opportunities that are out there, and there are plenty of them, and you will thrive through this time.
Great, thanks, Alon. Great advice. Look for that silver lining. Faye?
Mandy, thank you. Almost want to echo Alon's sentiments. I think that there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of positives. We have weathered many storms before as a nation, as a race. And so I think we will weather this if we all actually stop also navel gazing, stop looking up in the sky, but really just focus, I would think, on what it is that you can do for yourself and what can you do to help somebody else. And if we each do that, we'll stop being overwhelmed by, our countries imploding, and really we will be able to contribute to making a difference in our own lives, in our economy, and to our country. That's me. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Faye. Lisa?
Thanks. I think I would have said something very similar to Faye, but maybe just to say that I think this data-driven approach of Beyond COVID, I think, is to be welcomed and should be endorsed. Yes, resilience and care is very important. No holy cows. And this issue about, as much as you can to internalize risks. Corruption is a tragedy in our country. But if we say we can't do anything because of corruption, then in a sense, we're becoming a victim of the corruption of certain people in our country. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Valdine?
For me, I would just like to say, notwithstanding that this is far-reaching to all, and I'm sure everybody is struggling in different breadths, to resonate what Lisa has said, resilience is really important. I do like this concept of collaboration, and I really liked Lings's suggestion of if you are struggling, you still might have something to give in a different way of form. And then in your own struggles, reach out to people who could be of assistance, and then try to find ways to take control of your circumstance and find ways to innovate, partner, leverage other opportunities so that you can really stay resilient and have a longer term viability in any ways or forms. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Valdine. Thomas, last word for you. You're on mute. You're on mute. If you can just unmute yourself, Thomas.
Yeah, what I was saying, for me, what is my takeaway from this session is that we need to plan properly because the circumstances have changed. So we cannot continue doing business in the old traditional way of doing business. My request, though, however, would be that in future engagements, it would be appreciated if you could add more and more of participants from the public sector. Because when you look at the survey, indeed, there is a huge impact on public sector, and we may just want to hear more and more inputs from those who are practitioners in that space. So yeah, thanks a lot, but I'm very much encouraged. Not everything is lost. You know, we thrive on business as local government. So hopefully these sessions will assist business out there to get revived so that we too can get our revenue from them. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be part of this particular engagement.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you. I do want to give the last word just to Lings to wrap up the event. And then we're just going to announce the lucky draw winner as well. But Lings, if you don't mind, just wrapping up everything.
Fantastic. I think, first of all, just want to extend very sincere thanks, Mandy, to yourself for hosting the session, to Lisa for the keynote speech, and to all of the panelists who have given up your valuable time to make yourselves available today. For the press that are in attendance, we really appreciate you attending, and we would really like you to get the survey results out there and also, encourage people to become part of this grassroots business movement. In terms of, the key view from my perspective, Mandy, as the panelists have indicated, we are in difficult times. We are in the midst of the carnage. We can stand around and look at the wreck, or we can decide how it is that we each individually can help out. And what Valdine said is 100% on the money. We might see, 80% of the world as being have-nots and 20% as being the haves. You'll be surprised by what you can contribute to help the business next door. Thank you for that, Mandy.
Brilliant. Thank you for those parting words, Lings. If I can ask, we're just going to quickly put the lucky draw winner up. There was a draw of all the participants in the survey. So just to show you who the winner is for the lucky draw, drum roll. And the winner is Brenda Kutsia, who is the CEO of CMDS. And a pretty big prize there, Lings. How much does she get?
10,000, Mandy.
Amazing. That's fantastic in this time. So Brenda Kutsia, you are the proud winner of 10,000 Rand for taking part in the survey. So thank you, everyone. There are still several questions that haven't been answered. These will be answered on the website, on the BeyondCOVID website. Also, lots of questions about whether or not the slides will be shared for the media. Yes, they will be sent to you. And if you have any further questions, you are welcome to also send those through as well, and Lings will answer them. But from me, I have a radio show to go and do, and Lings is going to be on my radio show today as well to discuss this, particularly those numbers. But this has really been encouraging, and it's always just so good to feel buoyed about the fact that we're working together on solutions rather than focusing on the problem. So thank you, everyone. It's been a fantastic hour and a half. Go and have a look at the BeyondCOVID website, the playbook out next week as well.
Thank you, Charles. Bye.